I was standing outside the coffee shop, the familiar smell of roasted beans filling the air, when I saw them. He was sitting by the window, laughing, his hand casually resting on hers. His ex. The same woman who had left him when he had nothing, who had watched him fall apart and walked away. And now here they were, reunited, sipping lattes like nothing had ever happened. I stood frozen, the paper cup trembling in my hand, my breath catching in my throat. It was not just the betrayal of seeing him with someone else, it was the unbearable weight of knowing that I had carried him through the darkness, only for him to return to the very world that had broken him in the first place. He did not even see me. Or maybe he did and simply chose not to react. I walked away, heart pounding, vision blurred, wondering how I had been so easily discarded. When I first met him, he was a shell of a man. It was not that he was physically broken, although the wear and exhaustion on his face made him look years older than he was. It was the emptiness in his eyes, the way he moved as if gravity weighed heavier on him than on everyone else. He had just come out of a disastrous relationship, lost his job, and was staying on a friend's couch. The first time we talked, he barely looked me in the eye. But I saw him, really saw him. There was something in the way he spoke, in the way he tried to joke to hide his pain, that made me pause. He was hurting, and I knew what that felt like. I had been there once too. At first, it was just small things. I would check in with him after work, bring him food, listen when he talked about how lost he felt. It was clear he did not have many people left in his corner. His friends had grown distant, his family was tired of the chaos, and his confidence was buried under layers of guilt and failure. He would say thank you too often, as if he was surprised anyone cared. But I did. I cared deeply. We were not officially together in the beginning. I told myself I was just helping a friend, someone who needed a hand. But the more time we spent together, the more I saw him begin to change. He started taking care of himself more. He began applying for jobs again. I helped him rewrite his resume, sat beside him while he practiced for interviews. When he landed a part-time position at a bookstore, I celebrated with him like he had won the lottery. He smiled that night, really smiled, and I remember thinking that it was all worth it. Eventually, he moved into a small studio apartment. It was not much, but it was his own space. I helped him paint the walls, pick out second-hand furniture, even shop for curtains. I paid for a few things he could not afford, nothing extravagant, just necessities. He was always grateful, always saying he would pay me back when things got better. I told him not to worry. What mattered to me was seeing him stand on his own feet again. Slowly, our relationship evolved. One night, after a long conversation about his fears and regrets, he reached for my hand. That was the first time I truly felt like we were something more. He told me that I made him feel safe, that with me he could breathe again. We spent more nights together after that, making dinner, watching old movies, talking until the early hours. I never pushed him, never demanded more than he could give. I wanted him to heal at his own pace. There were times when it was not easy. He had moments of deep self-doubt, times when he would pull away or say things like he did not deserve happiness. But I stayed. I reminded him of how far he had come, that he was not the man he used to be. I listened when he needed to vent, held him when he cried, and encouraged him when he wanted to give up. He said I was his anchor. And I believed him. My friends, however, were not as convinced. Some warned me that I was giving too much, that he might just be using me as a stepping stone. Others said he seemed unstable and that I deserved someone who had already done the work to be whole. I defended him every time. I told them they did not understand, that they did not see the side of him I did. He was trying, and that mattered to me. I believed that people could change, that they could heal with enough love and patience. I supported him in every way I could. When he considered going back to school, I helped him research programs. When he hesitated about applying for a better job, I encouraged him to take the leap. When he started therapy, I drove him to his appointments. It felt like we were building something together. A life, a future. He even started talking about long-term plans, about maybe moving in together permanently, about what it might look like if we took the next step. There were quiet, beautiful moments too. Sunday mornings curled up with coffee. Afternoons at the park. The way he would reach for my hand absent-mindedly while we walked. I memorized those moments, thinking they were the foundation of something real. I thought I had found someone who appreciated not just what I did, but who I was. Someone who saw me as I saw him. Flawed, yes, but worthy of love. So when things began to shift, I did not notice it right away. He became busier, more independent, which I initially saw as a good thing. He was finally standing on his own. But the calls became shorter. The texts, delayed. He started canceling plans or showing up distracted. I assumed it was stress from work or school, not once suspecting that the life I had helped him rebuild was slowly being rerouted away from me. Looking back, I wonder if there was a moment when he decided he no longer needed me, or if it had been a gradual detachment. Maybe it was easier for him to slip away than to face the reality of what I had given up for him. Maybe he thought walking back into his old life would somehow make him feel more complete. Or maybe he just wanted to forget the version of himself that I had seen, the vulnerable, broken man who had clung to me in the dark. Whatever the reason, it did not change the truth. I had poured my heart into someone who, once whole again, turned away from the hands that had held him through the storm. And as I watched him laugh with his past like I had never existed, I realized that love, no matter how pure, cannot make someone stay if they are already looking for a way back to where they once belonged. The days that followed our first real connection were not filled with sweeping romance or dramatic transformation. They were slow, quiet, and sometimes painfully difficult. He was still figuring out how to exist in a world that had left him bruised, and I had taken it upon myself to walk beside him through that fog. I did not see it as charity or obligation. I saw it as love in its truest form, steady, patient, and willing. Every morning was a new test. He would wake up with a heaviness in his chest, sometimes unable to speak more than a few words. There were mornings he would cancel plans without warning, locked in what he called a gray day, when even getting out of bed felt like lifting a mountain. I never pushed him. Instead, I would show up with his favorite breakfast, sit beside him on the couch, and wait in silence until he was ready to speak. Sometimes we would go entire mornings without a full conversation, but my presence seemed to ease something inside him. Slowly, the gray days became fewer, and the light began to return to his eyes. There were small victories. I remember the first time he cooked a full meal again. It was not anything elaborate, just pasta with a jar of store-bought sauce, but the pride on his face was more satisfying than any gourmet dinner could have been. He looked at me with a shy smile, asking if it was good, and when I said it was perfect, his shoulders relaxed like he had just passed an important test. Those were the moments that made it all feel worthwhile. He started journaling at my suggestion. Writing, he said, helped him understand his own thoughts without feeling judged. I bought him a leather-bound notebook and a set of pens. At first, he only wrote a few lines each day, usually fragmented memories or observations. Over time, those pages filled with more coherent thoughts, reflections on his past, and hope for the future. He would occasionally read me excerpts, and I would listen with quiet reverence, never interrupting or correcting, just letting him have that space to be seen and heard. There were setbacks too. One night he disappeared for several hours without answering his phone. I panicked, driving around the city, checking the places he used to frequent. When he finally returned my call, he sounded dazed and distant. He said he just needed air, that the pressure of rebuilding was too much, and that he felt like he was failing me. I drove to him that night, and when I found him sitting alone in a dark parking lot, I did not yell or demand answers. I sat beside him, our shoulders touching in silence, and told him he did not have to carry the weight alone. He began therapy a few weeks later. It was not easy for him. He had a deep distrust of professionals, shaped by bad experiences and broken promises from the past. But he agreed to try because I asked, and that gesture meant more to me than he probably realized. After each session, we would talk, sometimes for hours, about what had come up. There were memories that made him cry, revelations that left him speechless, and questions he had never dared to ask himself. I listened to every word, sometimes holding his hand, sometimes wiping away his tears. In those moments, our bond grew stronger, stitched together by shared vulnerability and relentless care. My friends were not always supportive. One afternoon, during lunch with my closest friend, she looked at me across the table with an expression that hovered between concern and frustration. She said I was losing myself in someone else's pain, that I was acting more like a caretaker than a partner. She reminded me that I deserved a love that poured back into me, not one that drained me. I knew she meant well, but her words felt like an attack on something sacred. I told her he was not a project, that he was a person who needed love, and that I was willing to give it. She shook her head and said she hoped I would not regret it. My family was more subtle in their concern. My mother would occasionally ask how I was holding up, if I was eating enough, sleeping enough. My father said very little but gave me long, searching looks during our visits. I knew what they were thinking. They saw me pouring everything I had into a man who, from the outside, looked like he might never be able to return the same. But they also knew my heart, and they trusted that I would find my way, one way or another. Despite the doubts around me, I felt we were building something meaningful. He began showing more initiative, making plans for the future, talking about goals he had once abandoned. He started drawing again, something he had loved in his younger years but had not done in ages. I encouraged him to share his work, and he began posting sketches online. The positive feedback fueled him, and he started dreaming out loud, speaking of art shows and collaborative projects. It was beautiful to witness his rediscovery of self. He would often look at me with a kind of quiet awe, telling me that I had saved him, that he would be nothing without me. I would always correct him, saying he had saved himself and I had only walked beside him. But I will admit, it felt good to be needed. It felt good to be the light in someone else's darkness. We shared so many intimate moments, not just physically, but emotionally. We would talk late into the night about fears, dreams, the future. I believed we were creating a foundation that could carry us forward. I believed love like this could last. There was one weekend that stood out. We took a trip to the countryside, just the two of us, far away from the noise and pressure of everyday life. We stayed in a small cottage surrounded by trees. We cooked together, laughed, danced barefoot on the wooden floor. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, he took my hand and said that he could finally see a future again, and that I was the reason he still believed in good things. I remember feeling overwhelmed with emotion, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the hard part was behind us. It was in moments like those that I allowed myself to believe that love was enough. That patience and compassion could truly mend the broken pieces of a person's soul. I had invested so much, time, energy, emotion, but it never felt like a burden. It felt like purpose. And so I kept giving, not because I expected something in return, but because I believed in him, in us, and in the life we were slowly building together. But what I did not understand then was that healing is not always a straight path, and love, no matter how deep, cannot always anchor someone who is still searching for something they have not yet named. I did not know that even as he grew stronger, even as he began to stand on his own, there might come a time when he would want to walk away from the very person who stood by him when no one else did. I did not yet see the subtle shifts, the quiet changes that would eventually pull him back toward the life he had once tried so desperately to escape. At the time, all I saw was a man rising from the ashes, and all I wanted was to keep helping him fly. It happened gradually, almost so subtly that I did not notice the shift at first. He began waking up earlier, making coffee before I even got out of bed. There was a new energy in his voice, a lightness that had not been there before. He was laughing more, talking faster, and moving through the world with a confidence that felt both exciting and unfamiliar. I remember thinking that perhaps this was the version of him I had been waiting for, the man who had been buried beneath layers of pain, now finally rising. He started applying for jobs again, this time with an eagerness that surprised even him. I watched him comb through listings, refine his resume, and practice interviews in front of the mirror. He began paying more attention to his appearance, getting his hair trimmed more regularly, buying new clothes, and standing a little taller when we walked through public spaces. He received a job offer from a design firm downtown, a position that allowed him to merge his artistic skills with practical work. It was a victory we celebrated together, with takeout and wine, dancing around our living room like teenagers. I felt proud of him. I felt proud of us. The new job brought a structured routine into his life. He would leave early in the morning and return late in the evening, often with stories about meetings, co-workers, and office dynamics. I listened to him with interest, loving the sound of purpose in his voice. He spoke about future projects, career goals, and what success might look like for him now. There was a sparkle in his eyes that I had not seen in years. I told myself this was exactly what we had worked for, what I had always hoped would come. He was healing. He was building a future. And I was happy to see him finally breathing without pain. But slowly, certain things began to shift. He became less present during our quiet evenings. Where we once sat together for hours talking or watching old movies, he now seemed restless. His phone buzzed more often, and he would step out to take calls without much explanation. When I asked who it was, he would smile and say it was just work. Sometimes he would say it was a friend he had reconnected with. He assured me nothing was wrong, that he was simply busy, and I believed him. I wanted to believe him. After everything we had been through, I did not want to see shadows where there might be none. His wardrobe changed almost overnight. The casual clothes he used to wear were replaced with tailored shirts, fitted jackets, and polished shoes. He looked good, better than ever, but there was something about the transformation that felt performative. He seemed to care deeply about how he was perceived, more so than before. He started going to events with his coworkers, staying out late, coming home smelling like unfamiliar cologne and high-end restaurants. When I would ask how his night was, he would give short, vague answers. It was fine. Or just a work thing. He did not elaborate the way he used to. One night, he came home well past midnight. I was awake, sitting on the couch with a book I had not been reading, waiting for the sound of his keys in the lock. When he finally walked in, he looked surprised to see me still up. He said the team had gone out for drinks after a long presentation. He was tired, he said. He needed to shower and sleep. I nodded, even though my chest felt tight with the kind of unease I had not felt in a long time. I told myself this was normal. He was working hard. He deserved to unwind. But I started to miss him, and not just physically. I missed the way he used to look at me like I was the only person who understood him. I missed the quiet moments, the intimacy of shared vulnerability. He no longer opened up to me the way he once did. Our conversations grew shorter, more surface level. When I tried to ask about how he was feeling, he would brush it off, say he was fine, just tired. I stopped asking after a while, not because I stopped caring, but because I began to fear the answers I might receive. Friends noticed the change too. One evening, while having coffee with a friend of mine, she asked if everything was all right between us. I told her he was doing well, that he had finally found his rhythm. She looked at me, concern etched in her expression, and said, "You just seem left behind." I laughed it off, but her words stayed with me. Was I being left behind? Was the man I had loved back to life now moving ahead without me? There were small red flags I tried not to see. He stopped including me in future plans. Where we once talked about traveling together or getting a place of our own, he now spoke in singular terms. His career, his goals, his next steps. He started locking his phone, something he had never done before. He told me it was for work confidentiality, and maybe it was, but it still stung. He no longer shared his journal entries, no longer asked for my thoughts on his sketches. The distance between us was growing, invisible but undeniable. One afternoon, I found one of his sketchbooks on the kitchen table. It was filled with new drawings, bold and vivid, but none of them looked like the ones he used to show me. They were portraits of people I did not recognize, cityscapes I had never seen. They felt like glimpses into a life he was building without me. I flipped through the pages, my heart sinking. When he walked in and saw me with the book, he smiled and kissed my forehead, saying, "You would not understand the context. It is just work stuff." I nodded and handed it back, swallowing the ache that rose in my throat. Even when we were together, he seemed elsewhere. His eyes would drift during conversations. He would laugh at something on his phone and not tell me what it was. When I reached for his hand, sometimes he would pull away too quickly, claiming distraction or stress. I began to question myself. Was I imagining things? Was I overreacting? I told myself he was evolving, that healing looked different for everyone. I reminded myself of how far we had come, how much we had overcome. I did not want to let fear dismantle the life we had fought to build. So I kept trusting. I kept believing in the man I had loved back to life. I told myself that the distance was temporary, that he was just adjusting to his new world. I reminded myself of the nights we had shared, of the promises he had whispered in the dark. I clung to the belief that our love was still there, buried beneath the noise and busyness of his new life. I told myself that he was simply becoming the man he was always meant to be, and that I would be right beside him when he finally arrived. But deep down, something had shifted. There was a quiet sadness in me that I could not quite name, a growing sense that I was watching something slip away in slow motion. Still, I stayed. I stayed because I loved him. I stayed because I believed in what we had. And I stayed because I had not yet learned that sometimes, the people we save are not meant to stay beside us once they have found their wings. It was a Tuesday evening, one of those unusually warm nights that made the apartment feel stuffy even with the windows open. I had come home early, carrying groceries and a bottle of wine, hoping to surprise him with a quiet dinner. He had been distant again for days, retreating further into a silence that I no longer knew how to reach through. I thought that maybe cooking his favorite meal, reminding him of simpler times, might help us find our way back to each other. When I stepped inside, the lights were off. His shoes were by the door, his jacket hung on the back of a chair. He was home. I called his name softly, but there was no answer. I moved through the apartment and found him in the bedroom, asleep on top of the covers, his phone loosely clutched in his hand. He looked so peaceful, the lines of stress momentarily erased from his face. I hesitated, unsure whether to wake him or let him rest, but as I reached out to pull a blanket over him, his phone buzzed in his palm. It was not curiosity that made me look. It was instinct. The screen lit up with a name I had not heard in a long time. Marina. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Marina was his ex, the one he had told me had broken him, the one he had run from, the one I thought he had left behind for good. The message preview was short but enough to shatter me. I missed the way things used to be. Last night felt like old times. I felt something heavy drop in my stomach. I did not want to believe what I had just read. My mind immediately raced for explanations. Perhaps it was not what it sounded like. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Perhaps there was another Marina. But deep down I knew. I knew exactly what it meant. I had always trusted him with blind devotion, never thinking to question his loyalty, because I believed we were building something real. But in that moment, with his phone still buzzing in his hand, that belief began to die. He stirred awake, blinking at the light as he sat up. When he saw me standing there, he smiled groggily and stretched. I could not find my voice at first. I simply held out the phone, the message still on display. He took one look at it and the color drained from his face. He tried to speak, but I cut him off. I asked him to tell me the truth, and I begged him not to lie. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair, then said it was nothing serious. He said she had reached out a while back, that they had met for coffee, just to catch up. He told me it was all innocent, that he had not wanted to worry me, which was why he had not mentioned it. I stood there in silence, staring at him, trying to understand how casual he was trying to make it sound. I asked him what he meant by last night, and why she was talking about missing him. He shrugged and said she was probably confused, reading too much into things. He said I was overreacting. The gaslighting was subtle, but it cut deep. He made me feel like I was the one jumping to conclusions, like I was paranoid for even questioning him. He told me I should trust him, that he had done nothing wrong. But the more he spoke, the less his words made sense. He was fumbling, grasping at half-truths and vague explanations that did not hold together. I could see it in his eyes. He was hiding something. And I realized then that the man I had helped rebuild was no longer looking at me the same way. There was no softness, no regret, no desperation to make things right. There was only irritation, like my confrontation was an inconvenience he did not want to deal with. That night, after he went to take a long shower and left his phone unattended on the nightstand, I did something I had never done before. I opened it. I read the full conversation. The truth unraveled before me in line after line of messages that told a story far different from the one he had given me. They had been seeing each other for weeks. It had started with messages, then calls, then late-night visits. He had told her he missed her, that things felt right when they were together. He had talked about memories they shared, moments they used to laugh about. He had even mentioned me, briefly, referring to me as someone who had been good to him, but that things had changed. I felt physically sick. My hands trembled as I scrolled, my chest aching with every new message I read. This was not a mistake. This was a choice he had made repeatedly. And not only had he betrayed me, but he had also begun to return to the very life I had helped him escape from. He had gone back to the one person who had once hurt him deeply, someone he had sworn was part of a chapter he would never reopen. And yet, here he was, rewriting his story without me. I did not confront him immediately. I needed to understand more. I began to watch closely, how he spoke, where he went, what time he came home. I started to ask questions under the guise of casual conversation. The more I listened, the more cracks appeared in the stories he told. One night he said he was at a networking event, but when I called the restaurant to ask about a lost item, they told me no such event had taken place. Another time he said he had to stay late at work, but a friend of mine saw him at a bar across town, sitting with a woman who matched Marina's description. Everything I had believed in was slowly falling apart. I replayed every moment of our past, the times I stayed up with him through panic attacks, the nights I held him while he cried, the mornings I encouraged him to keep going when he felt like giving up. I thought about the way I defended him to everyone who warned me, who said he might break my heart once he got better. I had believed in him with every part of myself. And now I was watching him trade that love for a life that once nearly destroyed him. The betrayal was not just in the messages or the lies. It was in the ease with which he slipped back into that world. It was in the way he smiled when he read her messages, the light in his eyes that had once been reserved for me. He was not just reconnecting with her, he was reclaiming a version of himself that I had fought so hard to help him leave behind. And worst of all, he did not seem to think he owed me an explanation. He did not fight to keep me. He did not try to make me understand. He simply carried on, as if I was just a phase he had passed through. I felt my world collapsing beneath me. I cried in silence, not wanting him to see how much it hurt. I pretended to sleep while tears soaked my pillow. I smiled at work while my heart screamed in agony. I kept moving through the motions of our life, all while trying to piece together when exactly he had stopped needing me. When had he started looking past me? When had he decided that the life we had built was no longer enough? There was no single moment where it all shattered. It broke in fragments, each one sharp and unrelenting, cutting deeper than the last. I did not recognize him anymore, and worse, I began to question whether I had ever truly known him at all. Had I loved a version of him that never truly existed? Or had he become someone else, someone who no longer saw me as part of his future? In those quiet, painful nights, I began to see the truth that had been there all along. He had never planned to stay. I had been his sanctuary, his safe place to heal. But once he could stand again, he chose to walk away, back into the life that had broken him, and away from the love that had brought him back to life. It did not happen with a dramatic fight or a loud exit. It happened quietly, like a door closing in a long hallway where no one was left to hear it. One morning, he left for work and never came back. I waited for hours that turned into days, my phone cold and silent in my hand. I called, messaged, and emailed. At first, I told myself he must be overwhelmed, or something unexpected had happened. But deep down, I knew he was not coming back. 3 days later, I received a message from him. Not a call. Not even a voice note. Just a simple cold message that read, "I think we need space. I have moved out. I will come back for the rest of my things later." No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of the years I had given him. It was as if I had become a footnote in his story, something he could pack away and forget. I could not breathe after reading that. The message was so detached, so unlike the man I had once held while he trembled through his darkest hours. I stared at it, waiting for another message to follow, something to explain what this really was. But nothing came. Hours passed, then a full day, and still no word. I walked around the apartment in a daze, touching the furniture we had chosen together, running my fingers across the photographs we had framed, standing in the kitchen where I used to cook while he danced behind me. I checked the closet, and half his clothes were gone. His drawers were empty. I realized then that this had not been a sudden decision. He had planned it. He had packed when I was at work, taken pieces of himself away without me noticing. I sat on the floor, staring at the space where his shoes used to be, and felt the full weight of abandonment. When I finally gathered the strength to confront him, I called one last time. He answered, but his voice was hollow, like a stranger's. I asked him why he had left without a word, why he had not talked to me about whatever it was that had pushed him away. He sighed and told me it was not working anymore. He said we had grown apart, and that he needed to figure things out on his own. He never mentioned the messages I had seen or the woman from his past. He acted as though our years together had faded into nothing, like they were a temporary comfort he no longer needed. I asked him if he had been seeing her again, and after a long pause, he admitted that he had. He said it quietly, like he was confessing to something insignificant. I could hear her voice in the background, muffled but unmistakable. She was there. He was with her. My heart cracked in that moment, splintering into pieces I knew would never fit back the same way again. I told him he had destroyed me. I reminded him of the nights I sat beside him while he shook from nightmares, of the mornings I drove him to job interviews, of the day I stood by him when everyone else had walked away. I reminded him that I had loved him when he could not love himself. And he said nothing. He did not fight. He did not explain. He just listened, then ended the call. That silence echoed through every part of me. I wanted to scream, to shatter something just to feel real again. Instead, I curled into myself and cried until there was nothing left. I did not eat. I did not sleep. Days passed like shadows, long and empty. I wandered through the apartment as if it belonged to someone else, haunted by the sound of his laughter, by the feel of his arms around me, by the memory of who I thought he was. People reached out, friends and family who had once warned me. They tried to comfort me, told me I would be better off. But I could not hear them. I was still trapped in the disbelief of it all. I had loved him back to life. I had given everything, my time, my energy, my heart, to help him become whole again. And the moment he felt strong enough to stand on his own, he walked away. I found myself asking why over and over again. Why had he come to me if he never planned to stay? Why had he let me build him back up just to discard me when he was ready to move forward? Was I only ever a stepping stone? Was I just a safe place to land until he felt ready to return to the life that once broke him? I went through old messages, scrolled through photographs, trying to pinpoint the moment things changed. I listened to voicemails from months before, searching for clues I had missed. But none of it gave me answers. There was no clear sign. No moment when he had looked at me differently or pulled away with finality. It had happened slowly, like fog creeping in until everything was covered and I could no longer see. The pain was not just in the betrayal. It was in the erasure. He had moved on so effortlessly, as if our years together were a pause in his story rather than a chapter that shaped him. He stepped back into his old world like it had been waiting for him all along. And I was left alone, trying to understand how love could turn to indifference so quickly. I could not help but compare who he was when I met him to who he had become. When I found him, he was lost, struggling to find any sense of purpose. He was fragile, clinging to whatever light I offered. I held him through every breakdown, celebrated every small win, believed in him when no one else did. I watched him grow, encouraged every step. And then, when he stood tall again, he did not look back. He had become confident, self-assured, even charismatic again. He walked taller, smiled wider, dressed better. And with every sign of healing, he moved further from me. I thought it was our love helping him become whole. I thought we were growing together. But now I see he was only borrowing my strength until he no longer needed it. And once he was whole again, he went back to the life that had once destroyed him. There were nights when I could not sleep, haunted by the memory of his touch, the sound of his voice. I tried to remember what it felt like to be loved by him before everything unraveled. I questioned myself constantly. Was I not enough? Did I love too much, give too freely, lose myself in the process? I began writing letters I never sent. Pages filled with everything I wanted to say. I poured out my grief, my anger, my heartbreak. I wrote about the mornings I watched him sleep and felt hope in my chest. I wrote about the nights I waited by the door, praying he would come home. I wrote about the love that had been the foundation of my days, now reduced to silence. In my isolation, I started to rediscover small pieces of myself. I realized I had been so consumed with helping him that I had forgotten to take care of my own heart. I had put his healing above my own well-being, thinking that love meant sacrifice without limits. I began to see how much of myself I had lost in the process of saving someone else. But I was not ready to let go of the pain. Not yet. I needed to feel it, to honor it, to understand it. Because it had been real. My love had been real. My efforts, my devotion, my dreams, they had all been real. And even if he had chosen to walk away, even if he had gone back to something I could never understand, I knew that I had given my all. That mattered, even if he never saw it. The betrayal left scars I would carry for a long time. But in the ashes of what was, I began to feel something stir. A whisper of strength. A flicker of self-worth. A quiet promise that one day, I would rise again. Not because of him, but in spite of him. And this time, I would heal for myself. The first few days after he left, I could not bring myself to move. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking myself how I could have missed all the signs. I knew that nothing could take away the sting of his betrayal, but I also knew I could not remain trapped in the fog of grief forever. Slowly, almost unwillingly, I began to take small steps to piece myself together. I reached out to friends I had distanced myself from during those years of helping him. Their messages had been consistent, full of concern and love, but I had pushed them away, thinking I had to handle everything on my own. When I finally responded, they embraced me with open arms, offering not just their sympathy but their time, their companionship, and their understanding. It was humbling, in the best possible way. The laughter we shared, even if it was tinged with sadness, began to remind me of who I was before him. I rediscovered a part of myself that I had buried deep under the weight of emotional exhaustion. I decided to seek therapy. I had been hesitant before, not wanting to admit I needed help. I had always been the one who fixed things, the one who helped others stand tall. But I realized I could not heal alone. The first session was difficult. I was defensive, unsure of what to expect. But over time, the conversations became less about what he had done and more about why I had allowed myself to stay so long in a relationship that demanded so much and gave so little in return. I began to understand that the emotional labor I had put into that relationship was not one-sided by accident. It was a pattern I had carried from past relationships, from family dynamics, and even from childhood. Therapist after therapist had asked me the same question: why did you feel you needed to fix him? At first, I could not answer. It seemed too simple. But as the weeks passed, the pieces began to fall into place. I had always been the caretaker. I had always been the one to give more than I received, to try harder, to make sure everyone else was okay before I ever considered my own well-being. It was how I was raised, how I had learned to love. But it was not sustainable. And it was not healthy. In fixing him, I had lost myself. I had given so much, and yet, when the time came for him to return the favor, to stand by me when I needed him most, he left without a second thought. It was a painful realization, but it was also liberating. I had learned the hard way that love does not mean sacrificing yourself entirely. Love should be mutual, reciprocal, and built on a foundation of respect, not one person continually giving while the other takes. In the quiet moments when I reflected on my past relationships, I began to see the pattern more clearly. I could trace it back to earlier relationships, with family and friends, even with myself. I had been the one to offer care and compassion to those who did not deserve it, all in the name of love. I had taken on the role of the savior, the one who could fix everything, even when there was nothing broken to begin with. I had done this with him. I had done this with everyone. But in doing so, I had forgotten the most important person, myself. Gradually, I started to rebuild. I reconnected with passions I had set aside, hobbies that had once brought me joy before I gave all my time and energy to him. I began to understand the importance of setting boundaries, of knowing where to draw the line between being supportive and losing myself in someone else's problems. There were days when I struggled to silence the negative self-talk that told me I was not enough, that I had failed. But there were more days when I looked at the progress I had made and saw how much stronger I was becoming. The empowering moments were small but meaningful. I started saying no when I needed to. I prioritized my own needs, without guilt or shame. I stopped trying to fix everything. I learned to embrace my imperfections and realize that I did not need to be perfect to be worthy of love and respect. I became more aware of how much I had given up in the name of loving someone else, and slowly, I began to fill those empty spaces with things that nourished me. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, looking at the woman who had been through so much and yet had survived. She was not the same as the woman I had been when I met him. She had been tested, and she had come through the other side with scars that told the story of resilience. She was stronger now. She knew her worth. And, for the first time in a long while, I saw myself as someone deserving of love, not because I could fix someone else, but because I was whole even on my own. In the weeks that followed, I stopped chasing the version of him I had once loved, the person I had built him into. I realized he had been a reflection of my own need to be needed. The man I had loved was not the man who had walked away. The person who left was someone who no longer needed me. And that was something I could not change. But I could change how I moved forward. I began to choose myself. I made choices for my own happiness, my own growth. I learned to let go of the guilt, the shame, and the blame. There were still moments when I cried, when I longed for the love I had poured into someone who did not appreciate it. But those moments grew less frequent as I became more attuned to my own needs. I started to see how much I had given up to be with him, how much of myself had been lost in the process. The healing journey was not linear. Some days I felt like I was moving forward, and other days it felt like I had taken 2 steps back. But each step I took was a reminder that I was reclaiming my life. I had been broken, but I was not beyond repair. I was learning how to stand on my own, how to walk through the pain and come out the other side stronger than I had been before. The journey was slow, but with each passing day, I saw more clearly. I saw my worth. I saw my strength. I saw that I could choose happiness, even in the face of betrayal. And I knew that one day I would love again, not out of need, but out of choice. I would love from a place of wholeness, not from a place of fixing. And when that time came, I would be ready. But for now, I was enough exactly as I was. Months passed since he left, and the pain of his departure slowly became more of a memory than a current wound. I had reclaimed pieces of my life, little by little, and was beginning to understand that I had done more than just survive. I was starting to thrive. Then, one day, I heard his name again. It came from a mutual friend, a passing mention about how he had been struggling to find his way, falling back into old habits, and reconnecting with people from his past. I had been prepared for the possibility that his old life might consume him again, but hearing it from someone else made the truth clearer than ever. He was lost, just as he had been when I met him, and no matter how much I had loved him, I could not change that. I thought for a moment about whether I should reach out. I wondered if he would ever try to return, if he would come back and ask me to save him once again. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was not for him. It was for the version of myself that had once been willing to sacrifice everything for someone else, for someone who was not capable of giving me the same in return. That person, the one who was willing to pour herself out until she had nothing left, no longer existed. I had found her again, and I would not let her slip away. The idea of him coming back no longer held the same pull. I was no longer desperate to save him. The truth was, I could not fix him, and even if I could, I should not have to. I had spent too much time trying to repair someone who was not ready to heal, and in the process, I had neglected myself. I had learned the hard way that love should not be about saving someone else from themselves. It should be about 2 people building each other up, not one person carrying the other. I had spent so many years questioning whether I had done enough, if I had been strong enough, if I had loved him enough. But in the end, I realized that no matter how much love I gave, it would never be enough to fix someone who did not want to be fixed. And I could not continue to pour from an empty cup. As time passed, I found myself moving forward in ways I had never expected. I made choices that put my well-being first. I set boundaries where I had once been too willing to let them be crossed. I started new projects, things I had pushed aside for so long because I had been too consumed with his needs. I started painting again, something I had loved when I was younger but had abandoned as I focused more on his recovery. I also enrolled in a writing class, something I had always wanted to do but had never made the time for. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild not just my life, but the parts of myself that had been hidden for so long. One afternoon, I found myself going through old messages on my phone. I had kept them for so long, hoping to preserve the memory of the person I had once loved, but I realized that they no longer held any meaning. They were just words from a past I had left behind. I deleted them, one by one, and as I did, I felt a sense of freedom I had not experienced before. It was a symbolic act, one that marked my final release from the hold he had once had on me. I also made a decision to move into a new place. It was not a drastic change, but it was mine. A space where I could start fresh, where I could build a future without the shadow of him hanging over me. It was a small apartment, but it was mine. It was a place where I could create, where I could heal, and where I could finally feel at home again. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the journey I had taken. I had loved him back to life, but in doing so, I had almost lost myself. I had given everything I had, only to be abandoned when he no longer needed me. But that was not my story anymore. I had learned to love myself again, to understand that I was worthy of love and respect without having to earn it by fixing someone else. I had learned that my value was not determined by how much I could give to others, but by how much I valued myself. Looking back, I could see how far I had come. I had survived something I had once thought I could never overcome. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, and I had done it on my own. I no longer needed someone to save or fix. I had learned that the only person I could change was myself, and that was enough. As I moved forward, I promised myself that I would never allow someone to use me the way he had. I would never again sacrifice my own happiness for someone who was unwilling to give me the same in return. I had learned that love should not be a one-sided effort, and I would not settle for anything less than a partnership where both people are willing to grow together. I had loved him back to life, but I would never make the same mistake again. I would never lose myself for someone else, and I would never allow myself to be used as someone's savior again. The journey had been long and painful, but in the end, it had led me to a place of strength, of independence, and of self-respect. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally living my life for me.